A little something about me you may not know. One of the biggest motivators that got me into first the customer service space and now employee experience and workplace culture was that I hated bullies. Hated, hated bullies. I hated those that exerted their power and arrogance with no regard of the impact. Some organizations did it to their customers, see people more as numbers than as humans, and some employers do it to their employees at every level. This is not just a frontline staff thing. This happens throughout, or can happen throughout entire organizations, as leaders and cultures turn a blind eye. I've worked for bullies. I've had a prolonged traumatic effect on me based on some of those experiences. It's like those horror stories we tell from high school that may have happened years or decades ago, but we still have those scars. Well, those impacts can happen in the workplace too. My guest today has been bullied by more than one organization. And today she's going to vulnerably share how it felt. And hopefully we'll take those steps to recognize how not to be a bully, but also not allow it in the organizations we work in. It's important. Hold on. This is Relationships at Work, the guide for emerging leaders to create a workplace we love. I'm the person that brings that show to you, Russell Lolliker. Thanks for being here. Thanks for joining me as we get into a very raw topic, bullying. I've been in communications and leadership roles for decades, and over that time, bullying is something that's been, fascinating to me. I don't mean in a good way by any stretch of the imagination. This podcast is about our curiosity and effort to make work less shitty. And bullying is one of the ways you can make it the shittiest. I've seen executive directors yell from their offices just because they can to their staff. I've seen managers use their physical size to intimidate staff. I've seen executives prank call staff just to make sure they'd pick up the phone whenever they called, day or night. It's horrible behavior, and it continues at so many organizations. As I said off the top, it's one of the biggest factors for why I got into using my voice on the workplace experience, employee experience space. I hate bullies. It's a primal thing for me. No one should ever have to go through that, and we shouldn't condone it, even if those above us in a hierarchical chart do. My guest today, Rita Chand, I've known her for years, and we live in the same community, and I was just super excited when I heard that she was getting out into communities and helping spread the word about how to fight bullying, how to address it in the workplace. I had to have her on the show. Her experiences aren't unique. The impacts aren't either, and how she reacted to being bullied, also not unique. But we don't talk about it enough. As emerging leaders who are gaining influence in our organizations, we need to hear these stories. We need to feel these stories and ensure they never happen. Capital never happen. And if we do, then what kind of leaders are we? Can we honestly talk about values and diversity and inclusivity and employee centricity if we still turn a blind eye to bullying? Spoiler, no, you can't. We just can't if we're trying to build employee trust and trying to build a reputation as a place that people will want to work and stay. Sorry, this is a topic that gets me riled up. It hits me really personally, and I know it does for you too. So thank you so much for being here and spreading the message on how we can stop bullying. Now let's hear from Rita. And on the show today, we have Rita Chand, and here is why she is awesome. She's a certified life coach, a wellness counselor, and facilitator who specializes in recognizing bullying. She's recently created a workshop called the How to Recognize When You're Being Bullied in the Workplace. Really set off bells and whistles for me as someone I needed on the podcast, because bullying, it's a thing. It is a huge deal. I actually saw a quote from her on LinkedIn that I loved, which was, some of us don't even know it's happening until it's already impacted our physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual selves. So I had to have her. Hi, Rita.
Hi, Russell. How you doing?
Very, very good. Thanks for being here. We talk about diversity, equity, inclusivity, belonging so much. And there's this ugly side when you don't go down the path properly of DEIB, which is bullying. So I know this is going to resonate with a lot of people today, and I'm excited to get into it. But first, I have to ask the question I ask every one of my guests, which is, what's your best? I can sense the excitement in your voice. What's your best or worst employee experience?
Well, given the topic today, how about I share my best work experience working at the 2010 Winter Olympics in Vancouver. I was working directly with VANOC, and I was the assistant coordinator for team welcome ceremonies and victory ceremonies. It was a huge job. It was 18 hours a day, every day. And then we've switched over, of course, to the Paralympics up in Whistler. But I got one day off in that duration of time. And it was months in the making, of course. And my manager was amazing. We met beforehand. She flew out from Toronto to do this job, and she was amazing. We made a great team. I got to, I coordinated all the volunteers. We had volunteer dancers, we had a band the drummers from all the different cultures. It was incredible. It was like the center of the universe for this period of time during the Olympics, because you're in the Vancouver Olympic Village, and you're meeting you're getting to see all the teams, all the athletes, everything, all the excitement, just the aliveness. I will never forget that work experience that I had being there, because it was empowering. The team was great. We lifted each other up. We kept each other going. We fed each other. We brought it was an incredible overall experience. It was a lot of fun.
And interesting as for lack of a better term, like a stand-up or a sort of a culture that just basically gets created in a vacuum very quickly and disbands afterwards as well.
Yes.
So that can be such a hit and miss when it comes to creating an employee experience.
Yes, because there's no time for storming and norming and all that forming. There's just no time. You hit the ground running and off you go. And somehow magically it worked. And I think, when you're in, like you say, a vacuum like that, everyone is in the same boat. Everyone is dealing with the same type of situation. And so, whereas, I worked at the Olympics in Beijing, and it was very different. It was a very different experience. But it just somehow magically worked. And I think that was the magic of the Vancouver Olympics. I'm not gonna, I gotta be honest. There was something magical about that particular, and I know there's a lot of conversation about, it was a waste of money and all that. I get that. But the actual experience that I had it was just incredible all around.
Jealousy is the only tone you're going to hear from me when it comes to that story, because I didn't get a chance to go over. I did visit for a day, but to the stories I have heard, not just from you, but from others, to have that experience. I'm not going to talk about it anymore. Don't want to talk about it anymore, Rita, because it's too nice. It's too sweet. It's too jealousy in my voice.
Okay.
So let's move on.
The rest of the conversation will make you feel better about that. So
perfect. Yes.
Yeah.
We get the bar of, this is not what we're talking about.
Yeah.
I'm curious, as bullying, this being the topic, and I wanted to define it before we get too deep into it, but I want to start first. As someone who yourself has experienced bullying in the workplace, how did you know it was bullying? How did you know that there was a moment where it's like, oh no, this is something you can identify as bullying, versus, I don't know how else to perceive it? What was the tipping point for you?
Do you know, Russell, I wish I could tell you that, a couple of months after it started, I'm being bullied. Oh, I should do something about that. I should say something. I'm a grown up. Instead, it went on for 3.5 years before I saw it for what it was. And I think, when you work in a culture where it's all just kind of swept under the rug, and it happens, that it's happening to people in the moment. And I know it wasn't just me. I know it wasn't like a personal attack on me, but it wasn't until the damage had already been done when I realized that this is what was happening. And someone had said to me, you know what? I think you might have PTSD from the bullying. You should seek counseling. And I was like, PTSD? Bullying? What are you talking about? And it was all because this person had come up behind me at where I was sitting at my desk and said something. And I had such a physical reaction to the fact that this person was coming up behind me like an attack, like a threat. And also that the word bullying there was no way. There was just no way. So unfortunately, it took me a long time. It did. It had never really happened in my life before. And so I didn't know what I was looking for. I wouldn't have called it that. I would have called it, well, I'm going to be honest. I thought I was the problem. So I did a lot of things. I took courses and I did workshops and I read books and I listened to podcasts and I watched YouTube videos, and just because I knew that there had to be something that I could do better that would make it better, because as communication is my number one value, I thought I'll just communicate better. But none of it worked. And it took me a long time to realize I was not the problem.
Did you associate, because I'm looking at myself of thinking of bullying, and I equate it to high school. I equate like, hey, I grew up with John Hughes. So, I mean, those were my movies.
Yeah.
So bullying is that being pushed into a locker, being nudged. And I think all physical things. And then you move into the whole Mean Girls realm. I'm movie references, right?
Yeah, it's okay.
But that's what I equate to, is this obvious bullying. Is that what was your barrier? I'm just taking a wild guess here. Is that you just didn't see it as what you recognize as bullying?
Absolutely. We grew up in the same generation. Those are my movies too. That's the bullying, like high school. Sure, I was bullied one time in high school, and I will remember that for the rest of my life. It was one day, and it was awful. And but I remember that from high school. So I don't expect it to happen in a professional environment. And so it couldn't have been bullying. I obviously wasn't doing a good job. Yeah, in terms of a barrier, it did not occur to me. I am not the type of person that I've had so many people say this to me over the last few years, where I would never have guessed that someone like you could be bullied. Mm-hmm. And that was part of why I never shared with people, because I had so much shame around, but I'm not the kind of person is that what's happening? I'm not that person. I can't imagine that people would bully me, but they did.
Let's set the stage for those that may not know what bullying is or be confused as to what it could look like or feel like. How would you define bullying in the workplace?
Well, I mean, you can find all kinds of descriptions online, but for me, I simplify it by saying it's an imbalance of power. So there's that structure of it, but also anything that it's even the perception. 75% of bullying in the workplace is gaslighting. So that there's the overt definition of bullying, right? Where you get punched in the face and you get shoved into a locker. There's all those types of things. Then there's the covert bullying. So there's almost like two descriptions. You could almost say there's two definitions of bullying. But if you were just to look at it from the simplified version, it's anything that happens in an environment that makes you feel smaller. So and we know when someone is intentionally trying to make us feel small. We know when we're being excluded. We know when we're being rejected. We know what those feelings are like. And so it's that. I can tell you from my own personal experience, the amount of times I would come home from work feeling this big, it was, I lost count. I lost count.
Overt seems pretty obvious. So I'm curious, what are examples of covert bullying?
Sure. So micromanagement is one covert version of bullying. If you have a manager or a supervisor that stands over your shoulder, watching everything that you do, or gives you an assignment and then asks over and over again how it's going, it creates anxiety. It creates a sense of panic. And we immediately, we as humans, we have a fight or flight or a freeze or fawn. And mine is automatically freeze. Like I've done something wrong. If I have had a micromanager as a boss, and I got used to it. I actually got used to it, which actually is not a healthy thing. So I say that almost in surprise, because I think I just got that as I said that out loud. I got used to it. So it became normal for me. And this is the problem. And so gaslighting, as I mentioned, is a form of bullying. There's the false promises. There's being excluded from meetings that you know that you're supposed to be a part of, or that you're working on a project and suddenly you're no longer working on a project, or your job changes without any discussion, without any conversation, without anything. And a gossip is a form of covert bullying, because if it's creating a hostile work, or like a hostile or toxic work environment where you feel you don't want to go to work, you feel a sense of panic when you think of going to, it's all covert. And the interesting thing is we focused on the overt side of bullying. But when you have a manager who says to you, "Oh, hey, I was checking out your Instagram on the weekend and I saw that you posted whatever it is," that's threatening. It can be perceived as threatening. So I think the thing that we forget is even the perception of bullying needs to be addressed. It may not actually be occurring because, again, we have reactions to things. It could be trauma from our past. But even the perception of it needs to be addressed.
It's funny because some of the examples you provided, throughout my career, I've absolutely seen examples of every one of those. And if
Yes.
you had ever cornered any single one of the people that had done some of those things, they wouldn't think of themselves as a bully. They're shitty leaders, but you would never, as a label, and some people, other outside looking in, wouldn't like right off the bat. I didn't even think bullying when I was thinking a few of those things. I was thinking, oh, just a shitty leader, just somebody who has no idea where their boundaries are, or understanding the impact of their decisions or their indecisions.
I think it has evolved over time. We have a generation of people who are now starting to retire out of the workforce and starting to move into, how do I want to say, less leaders who have been around for a long time and have done things in a very particular way, who don't see micromanagement as a form of bullying, who don't see gaslighting as a form of bullying. That's fair. That's fair, because that when they were in their leadership roles, when they first started, that just wasn't the case. But I can tell you honestly, anything that happens in a work environment that creates anxiety or panic or messes with your mental health in any way can be considered bullying these days. And this is the problem, is so many of us in the workforce have experienced anxiety, the pandemic created just a whole world of mental health issues, as we know. And the way that employees were treated during the pandemic is part of that issue, is that bigger issue as well, because everyone was stressed out. Everyone was feeling their own level of anxiety. Everyone was going through their own personal stuff during that time, and it was getting taken out on the employees. And I know it did with me. I know that's part of what happened, because you're having all these remote conversations, these video chats and things. Anything can get said. Anything can get said to you, and you can't do anything about it. There's no one to talk to. Where do you go? And that's the other thing. Anyone that walks around in fear for their job, and that happens, there are certain organizations where your job is threatened every day, is also a form of bullying. So that threat, it hangs over your head. And so when I was in China, in Beijing, our director said to us, we can send you home at any time. That's all they said to us, because they had sent someone home, and we all knew that's all this person said to us. And the rest of the time we were in Beijing, we were terrified of losing our jobs. So tell me that's not a form of bullying. We're in a foreign country. We're stressed out already. And this is what we're hearing.
We did touch on the impacts of bullying being as much about, shitty leadership as the impacts of those decisions, indecisions, or just that even mention of, you're disposable, you're replaceable.
Yes.
I've worked in the service industry. They used to pull that shit on us all the time.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Like, I can get somebody else here on Monday if you don't do X, X, and Y.
Yes.
What is the impact on a personal level?
Yeah.
I want to ask culturally as well. But first I want to start with personally. If bullying is, I guess, condoned because nobody's doing anything about it, what is the impact to individuals?
So the only way for me to answer this question is to answer it from a personal perspective. And for me, I was distraught every single day. I started having panic attacks. I was put on high blood pressure meds because that's just how it happened. Over time, after about a year and a half, I was afraid to leave my house. I had days where I was afraid to leave my house. I called in sick more than I had ever done. And I had worked in an organization for 26 years. And so I was in the same institution for 26 years, 5 years with a different organization. And I called in sick more in those 5 years than I did in those, 21 years previous. I was afraid every time I would get an email, I would see an email pop into my inbox and my whole body would react. I would start sweating if I had to go into a meeting because I never knew if I was getting fired. My self-esteem, my self-confidence, I had headaches all the time. My skin started to, gray. My iron levels were low. I mean, there were so many things, but I didn't know. It all happened over time. I wasn't sleeping. I cried all the time. I remember in the office, I would go into the bathroom at least once a day and I would just cry. And then I would come back and do my work. There's not an area of my life that it didn't touch. And I realize in hindsight that I wasn't talking about it either. So that probably wasn't helping. But that also is one of the impacts is we're so afraid, so ashamed, and so embarrassed. At least I was and the culture is to stay silent. Because if I say something, that could mean me losing my job and or retaliation, because we know that happens. So it took 2 years to dig myself out of that hole of my mental health being at its worst. I had days where I would never have harmed myself ever. That's not me. But I would wake up some mornings disappointed that I was awake because that meant I had to do this again, that I had to spend another day doing this same, surviving something, an environment that just really chipped away at me for, all that time. And yeah. And now here I am having these conversations, and that is never going to happen to me again. Of that, I'm clear.
Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
I think culturally when I hear stories like that, because it happened to you for so long.
Yep.
So it's being normalized. It's being normalized both by yourself and by those that are doing the bullying,
Yes.
because they think that behavior is okay, because their colleagues and their superiors, their direct reports aren't saying anything,
Mm-hmm.
aren't going, you know what? No, you need to take a course. You need to go away. You need to be fired. So it's being allowed. So there are other people around you that are watching that behavior and
Yes.
going, oh, so this is the kind of place this is.
Mm-hmm. And that's a really good point, because the silence is the killer. The fact it's, that tagline or that saying, when you see something, say something. We don't do that. In fact, people will just leave the job. If it's an uncomfortable work environment, often people will just leave. And this is a thing that Gen Z is really getting known for, is they don't tolerate anything. So they'll just leave. But the problem is, if they don't say something, it just continues. They've gone off, probably found a better work environment, but the problem is still there. And so for me, one of my biggest commitments or intentions is to get people talking about it. It happens. We need to stop being embarrassed about it. We need to stop being ashamed that it's happening to us. And I think and I say that like idealistically, I get that, because it's not, it's so bred into our culture. It's so a part of the culture in a workplace that those of us who are experiencing it just know nothing's going to get done. And in my case, I took all the right steps. I did all the things that I was supposed to do. I went to all the people in the what's the word? The hierarchy. I went in exactly the way that I was supposed to, and suffered through a investigation for months and months and months after filing a formal complaint. And even though allegations were substantiated, nothing was done. And that was it for me. And what I realized was, as a steadfast, very loyal employee, it meant nothing. It meant nothing. So my loyalty ended up blowing up in the end anyway, which is so unfortunate because I really loved my job. I was very proud of what I was doing, but I saw it. I also saw it happening to other people. I had people coming to me because they saw it happening to me, so they confided in me, and there was nothing that I could do. So the problem is the silence. And I'm not saying anyone's at fault in terms of, like, we all are afraid of all those things I already mentioned. But if we can change the culture from silent to like screaming it from the rooftops and drawing attention to it, I understand there's not a lot of resources and there's not a lot of money. And oh my gosh, what if we get rid of this person? Then this won't get done. And I get that. But the damage that's being done to the employee and to the people watching it happen, and to then in the culture and all of that, is it worth it in the end? Is it worth it to have all your staff just leave and then have to rehire and put in all that work versus actually doing the work that's required to take care of the issue, and then have your staff actually trust you that you're going to have their back, and then you have their loyalty? Like, I can see it so logically, but it doesn't work that way, unfortunately. So
I want to dip my toe into culture a little bit, because we talked about cultures, but when it comes to bullying or certain way of speaking, energy, that can be different based on the culture in which you come from, which you're coming into the workplace. So we talk about diversity, we talk about inclusivity, but bullying could be misconstrued based on different cultures and how they're used to interacting. Thoughts on that?
Oh, yes, that's a great point. I come from Indian background. My dad wasn't a yeller, but my mom definitely, And so the way that there's things that she says that are so offensive to me personally, but she's just saying them because that's just normal for culturally. I see it also with, Okay, so when I went to China, when I went to Beijing, we had to take culture training. So for a week or 10 days, I think, we were training on how to properly incorporate ourselves into the Chinese culture. And there is a specific way of speaking that certain cultures have that sounds aggressive, that can come across as offensive or as like insulting. But it's the training in that too. There's cultural awareness. There's different things. There's webinars. There's all kinds of things around culture now that could help. And also if you have a leader. So again, coming back to communication as my number one value, there is nothing that can't be solved inside of communication. So if you have a leader who is of a different culture, comes from a different culture, or an employee that is, have a conversation. Hey, sometimes this is how I come across, so you got to let me know. Or if this is something that I am very well practiced at now, but if I am uncomfortable with the way someone is speaking to me, I will say, hey, like, can I just check in? But I have a lot of nonviolent communication training now with my schooling. And so it's just how I operate. But I think addressing those things would make a huge difference. Even a conversation, it doesn't have to be I get it. There's not always time to take workshops and things like that. But there's definitely resources out there that would help with that.
So let's end bullying, Rita. So
let's end it.
Let's end bullying.
Okay.
What would you recommend to an organization that is trying to combat bullying? What would you put into place in an organization? If communications is key, there needs to be some processes or mechanisms in place that are allowed to embrace that communication. What would you suggest?
Well, I think it needs to come directly from the higher ups. I think the higher up it comes from, the better it falls in terms of, this is what we're committed to. If my boss's boss has a meeting and says, look, we know we have a problem. I think part of the problem currently is that there's no time, there's no resources, there's no money to put into it. So let's just pretend like we don't have a problem from the executive level. But if we can get some buy-in and we shouldn't have to get buy-in from an executive level, but I think it would make a difference if it was coming from them. So there's always a lot of talk. There's a lot of organizations who talk about, your mental health is important to us and our work culture is important to us. How many organizations out there brought their employees back into the office because culture is important, but culture is so toxic that employees don't want to come back to the office. So they're just quitting in droves. So if we could get like the bosses, the big people talking, the big bosses talking about this topic and pretending like it doesn't exist, it would make a difference. And then have me come in and have a conversation.
What I would love to see, and this is a mechanism with communications, is we talk about, well, onboarding is one thing.
Yes.
But when we get into stay interviews, thrive interviews, and exit interviews, and I mean regularly conducting those, organizations talk about these things, but they don't actually necessarily do them. But when they get that information as hopefully a safe space for people to be honest and open, that they do something with that information. If somebody is concerned or complaining or singling out somebody that is bullying them, maybe that's a mechanism for somebody to go, oh, they left because they were really honest in the exit interview. Collecting that information is one thing. Doing something with it is a very different one.
I would like to see a culture consultant or a wellness counselor or someone who is the point person, because let's be real. HR shops, as great as some HR professionals are, their hands are tied. If the executive doesn't want anything done, it's not going to get done. And so if there was someone who was the point person that could be trusted, that people knew could be trusted, and that's also part of the problem. How do you trust someone when you don't trust your organization? How do you bring someone in that someone's willing to talk to, that will be able to gather the information and actually make some kind of difference? So it's, your question just leads to more questions. But personally, that's what I would like to see. I think every organization needs to have some level of wellness as the focus, and not wellness like, hey, let's have a yoga class at lunchtime. There's benefits to that as well, but like wellness on the holistic, mental, physical, spiritual, emotional level, and make sure that staff are thriving. It's one thing to have like a quarterly meeting with your boss about how are things going, but when it hangs over your head like it's a mandatory task that you have to do, it's just another part. It's just another piece of it.
So current Rita, what would you say to previous Rita who's just starting to get bullied at work? What would you recommend to them to do now in hindsight?
Use your voice. You have a voice. Your voice is powerful. You have much to say. You have a message. You know this is a problem. Just say it. Speak it. Put it out there. And take what you get. But at least it's out there.
And the world has changed quite a bit, even in the last 5 years.
Yes, it has.
Of what organizations need to wake up to. They're kicking and screaming, but they are progressing. Even at that time, if you had used your voice, it may have been heard louder now than it might have been back then, based on how the world is shifted, and organizations are needing and scrambling to keep up with it.
Yes. And I just want to say, So yes, kudos to the fact that the world is changing and headed in that direction. And also that more and more people are listening. But I want to say that what happened to me and the way that it happened and exactly the way that it happened in the time that it happened was exactly what needed to happen. And I have so much gratitude for the fact that I went through that experience, if you can believe it, because I worked through a lot. I took a lot of therapy, a lot of taking care of myself. And I came through the other side here doing work that I was put on this earth to do. And that is clear to me now. And if all of that hadn't happened, I would not know that this was a dream I had that I didn't even know.
And I love and I value that was your personal journey to get that.
Yeah.
But also we should highlight that not everybody is going to be able to handle it the same way.
That's exactly right.
Right. So you not self-harming doesn't mean somebody else might
not under that's the same
duress.
And thank you for saying that, because I think the thing that's important to know is it can happen. And then who's responsible? Who do we point the finger? Who's that family that's going to, this, that's a terrible thought. It's a terrible thought, but it is a reality and it happens every day. And it shouldn't be happening because someone is being mistreated in their job. Our job is it's our job. It's our job.
So let's educate some people. Rita, if you had to recommend a book to an emerging bully and you wanted them to look at a book or read a book or take a course, besides your own, of course, what would you recommend that they take?
Okay, so that's a great question. So the funny thing is there's actually 3 that come to mind, and they're all old. I don't even know if they're in print anymore, but there's one called Corporate Hyenas at Work. There's one called The Bully at Work, and there's one called Silent Hell, Workplace Violence and Bullying. But the one that made a huge difference for me, it's unrelated to bullying, but made a huge difference, is called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. And he's a former FBI agent, and he talks about negotiation in a way that it really landed for me in terms of my experience. And so that's the one I would highly recommend. And it may seem a bit odd, but trust me, it's a good one.
If you had to tell someone one simple action people can do right now to improve their relationships at work, what would it be?
I think personally, to be able to say, hey, I see what's going on. Are you okay? Are you okay? Is there anything that I can do? If we could say that to each other, if we could have those types of conversations, if we're watching it happening, then we become part of the problem. And then the more people that do that, the more people will do that. At least that's the hope.
Always the hope.
Yeah.
That's Rita Chan. She is a certified life coach, wellness counselor, and facilitator focusing on recognizing bullying. Thank you so much for being here, Rita.
Thank you.
And that'll do it for another episode of Relationships at Work, the Emerging Leader's Guide to Creating a Workplace We Love. If you love this episode, and I really hope you did, there's other content that I share that you might find as useful. Just go on russelllawlacher.com or relationshipsatwork.ca. And at the top right, you'll see a little button that says Raw Notes. It's spelled R@W Notes. And if you sign up there, you'll get a note every week that has resources. It talks about the latest episodes of the podcast and the show, and also some unique free content for me about a topic that I don't talk about in many other places, but it's an experience or an angle or something that I saw that I'm like, you know what, this needs to be talked about. This needs to be addressed. And I share it in the Raw Notes, and I hope you will sign up and get that delivered to your inbox. Yeah, you also get a free series of employee interviews for the journey, onboarding, thriving, exit interviews. I don't think enough organizations have them, so I thought I'd create them as a free resource myself. So you just sign up and you get that as a free takeaway too. Not so shabby. Thank you very much for joining. Always a pleasure. Take care.